Third party never expected your soulmate to find this out about you. Now his next move has them panicking. My beloved child, something has shifted where no one was looking, and the third party was the last person prepared for what your soulmate has just discovered about you. For a long time, someone believed they understood the entire situation. They thought they knew what your soulmate believed about you. They assumed they knew which doubts still remained, which questions had never been answered, and which version of your story would eventually become permanent. But one unexpected discovery has changed the atmosphere. And strangely, it was not something dramatic that exposed the truth. It was something small. Something your soulmate almost overlooked. A detail connected to you that suddenly made several old moments make sense. Stay close to this message, because what they discovered is only the beginning. The real turning point is what happened inside your soulmate after they understood it. They started looking backward. Not with regret. With clarity. Conversations that once seemed confusing began forming a pattern. Moments when you remained quiet instead of defending yourself suddenly carried a different meaning. Choices you made that once appeared distant or difficult now looked completely different. And your soulmate quietly realized something powerful. You may have been misunderstood far more than they ever knew. That realization was never part of the third party's expectation. They had counted on uncertainty remaining between you. They expected unanswered questions to stay unanswered. But truth has an unusual way of arriving. Sometimes it does not enter loudly. It simply connects two details that were never supposed to meet. And once they connect, everything changes. Here is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Your soulmate did not immediately reveal what they had learned. They became quieter. More observant. They started paying attention to the words being spoken around them, especially whenever your name entered the conversation. Why? Because they wanted to know who would behave differently now that they possessed information no one realized they had. And someone did. The third party. A strange hesitation appeared. A question was asked too quickly. Then another. Your soulmate noticed. And suddenly, this was no longer only about discovering something about you. It became about discovering why someone had been so invested in keeping them from seeing it. Don't skip what comes next, because this is where your soulmate's next move begins taking shape. Instead of confronting anyone, they did something far more unexpected. They started protecting the discovery. They stopped revealing what they knew. They allowed everyone around them to believe nothing had changed. But internally, everything had changed. Your soulmate was no longer looking at you through other people's interpretations. They were beginning to look at you through their own understanding. And that difference is enormous. What if this is the moment that changes the entire path? Because the third party can sense that something is different now. They cannot identify exactly how much your soulmate knows. They cannot tell where the information came from. And most importantly, they cannot predict what your soulmate intends to do with it. That uncertainty is creating pressure. Not because something negative is coming, but because an old narrative is losing its power. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that your actions carried reasons they never fully considered. Your silence had context. Your distance had meaning. Even the moments when you seemed hardest to understand may have contained more sincerity than anyone realized. And now your soulmate has one question they cannot push away. What else about this person have I misunderstood? That question opened a door. Behind that door are memories, details, unfinished conversations, and one particular moment involving you that your soulmate has suddenly remembered very clearly. Stay a little longer in this story, because that memory matters more than it appears. At the time, your soulmate thought nothing of it. But after this new discovery, they remembered exactly what you said. They remembered your expression. They remembered what happened immediately afterward. And suddenly, the pieces aligned. You had given them a clue long ago. They simply were not ready to recognize it. Now they are. And that is precisely what the third party never expected. But there is another layer. Your soulmate has not only discovered something about your past behavior. They have begun noticing something about your character. Something consistent. Something difficult to imitate. Even when circumstances became uncertain, there was one quality in you that remained unchanged. And once your soulmate recognized that quality, they began comparing it with everything they had previously been told. The comparison did not match. That is when curiosity became determination. Your soulmate wants answers now. Real answers. Not assumptions. Not second-hand interpretations. Not fragments passed through other people. They want to understand you directly. And somewhere nearby, the third party has realized exactly what that could mean. Because if your soulmate begins asking the right questions, the entire picture may become clearer. Wait till the final moment of this part. There is one more detail. Your soulmate has already decided on a next move. It is quiet, calculated, and surprisingly simple. They are going to test what they have discovered without announcing that they are testing anything. One conversation. One carefully chosen question. One opportunity for the truth to reveal itself naturally. And the third party does not know when that conversation will happen. That is why the atmosphere has changed. Because your soulmate is no longer searching blindly. They have found the first piece. Now they know where to look for the second. And the second piece may reveal something even bigger about you, something that could completely reshape the way your soulmate sees the connection between you. So remember this. Sometimes being understood does not begin when you explain yourself louder. Sometimes it begins when another person finally becomes ready to see what was always there. Your soulmate is reaching that point. The third party never expected it. And what your soulmate discovers next may explain why someone's behavior around your name has suddenly become impossible to ignore. But there is one thing your soulmate still doesn't know. The clue they are about to follow leads somewhere completely different from where they expect. And when they realize who originally knew the truth about you, the entire story changes. The strangest part is this: your soulmate did not follow the clue immediately. They waited until everyone around them believed the moment had passed. That silence changed everything. Because while the third party was watching for confrontation, questions, or some obvious reaction, your soulmate was doing something completely different. They were connecting patterns. Quietly. Carefully. One memory at a time. And the deeper they looked, the more one uncomfortable possibility began to emerge. Someone may have known much more about you than they ever admitted. Stay with this, because the next discovery was not hidden in some dramatic secret. It was hidden inside an ordinary conversation, one your soulmate had almost forgotten. They remembered a moment when the third party had spoken about you with unusual certainty. Not curiosity. Certainty. At the time, your soulmate accepted it. Why wouldn't they? The words sounded confident. The explanation seemed complete. There appeared to be no reason to question where that information had come from. But now? Your soulmate noticed something they had missed. The third party had described your intentions without ever explaining how they could possibly know them. That single realization created a new question. How did they know what this person was supposedly thinking? Silence. Think about that. How can someone confidently describe another person's feelings, motives, or future decisions without ever having an honest conversation with them? Your soulmate suddenly understood that certainty is not always evidence. Sometimes certainty is simply confidence wearing a convincing disguise. And once that thought entered their mind, they began reviewing everything. This is where the situation became far more interesting. Because the third party had expected your soulmate to discover one isolated fact about you. They never expected that discovery to make your soulmate question the entire chain of information surrounding you. One question became 3. 3 became 10. And suddenly, your soulmate was no longer asking, "What should I believe about you?" They were asking, "Who benefited from me believing it?" That changed the direction completely. You might miss the turning point if you leave here, because your soulmate's next move was not emotional. It was strategic. They decided to stop asking people directly about you. Instead, they started listening. There is a difference. When you ask someone a question, they know what information you want. When you simply listen, people often reveal what they never intended to explain. Your soulmate understood this. So they became unusually calm. Someone mentioned you. Your soulmate did not react. Someone brought up an old situation. Still no reaction. Then the third party entered the conversation. And something happened. They added a detail. A tiny detail. Most people would have forgotten it instantly. Your soulmate didn't. Because that detail contradicted something the third party had said earlier. Not dramatically. Just enough. But sometimes one contradiction is all it takes. Your soulmate felt the shift internally. They didn't expose it. They didn't challenge anyone. They simply stored the information. And for the first time, the third party realized they could no longer read your soulmate's thoughts. That was the beginning of the pressure. Because until now, they had always been able to predict the reaction. Mention you watch your soulmate's expression. Raise a question, observe the hesitation. Offer an interpretation, see whether your soulmate accepts it. But now there was nothing. No visible doubt. No agreement. No resistance. Just calm. And calm can be incredibly revealing when everyone else expects confusion. Your soulmate was learning. Not only about you. About everyone surrounding the story. Then came the moment nobody expected. Someone else spoke. Someone who had remained almost completely outside the situation. They didn't know your soulmate had been searching for answers. They didn't know the third party's earlier version. They weren't trying to prove anything. They casually remembered something you had done. Something generous. Something private. Something you never used to gain attention. And suddenly your soulmate heard a version of you that felt completely different from the one they had been given. Pause here. Because this is the part that touched them. The person explained that you had once been given an opportunity to make yourself look better at someone else's expense. You could have taken it. Nobody would have blamed you. Instead, you refused. You protected someone's dignity when there was nothing for you to gain from doing so. Your soulmate became very quiet. Because that behavior matched the quality they had already started noticing in you. Consistency. The same character appearing in completely separate moments. Different people. Different circumstances. Same pattern. And that is difficult to dismiss. Something inside your soulmate softened. Not into blind belief. Into understanding. There is an important difference. They were no longer trying to idealize you. They were trying to see you accurately. And accuracy was bringing them closer to you than assumptions ever had. The third party noticed. Of course they did. They noticed your soulmate no longer joining certain conversations. They noticed certain comments were no longer producing the expected response. They noticed your soulmate had started asking questions that seemed unrelated but weren't. And then came the question that changed the atmosphere. Your soulmate casually asked, "When did you first learn that about them?" Simple question. Almost harmless. But the third party hesitated. Only for a second. Still, your soulmate saw it. Then came an answer. And that answer created another problem. Because the timeline didn't fit. Your soulmate remembered exactly when certain events had happened. If the third party's answer was correct, they would have known something about you before they claimed they had any reason to know it. Now the mystery was no longer theoretical. There was a gap. A real gap. And your soulmate wanted to understand it. Stay till the end, because this is where their next move becomes impossible to predict. They didn't push harder. They smiled. Changed the subject. Allowed the conversation to continue. The third party probably thought they had escaped the question. But your soulmate had received exactly what they needed. Not an explanation. A direction. Now they knew which period of the story to revisit. And they knew there was someone else who might remember what actually happened. Someone the third party never expected your soulmate to speak with. That conversation hasn't happened yet. But your soulmate is already considering it. And this is where the third party's uncertainty begins turning into panic, not panic from danger, but the realization that they may no longer control how the story is understood. Because the next person your soulmate wants to approach has no reason to protect anyone's version. They were there. They saw what happened. And most importantly, they remember you. If this story is speaking to someone who has ever been misunderstood, you can share it with them, leave a comment about the lesson you are taking from it, and subscribe if you want to stay connected to this journey as the truth unfolds naturally. Because there is something larger here than one person's opinion. It is about what happens when someone stops accepting interpretations and starts searching for understanding. Your soulmate is doing that now. And the more they search, the less the old story survives. But there is another surprise coming. Remember the private act of kindness your soulmate just learned about? There was another person present that day. Someone who saw exactly what you did. And this is the person your soulmate is considering contacting. Yet your soulmate doesn't know one crucial thing. That person has been holding on to something connected to you for a very long time. Not something frightening. Not something designed to create conflict. Something that may finally explain why you made a decision that confused your soulmate in the first place. And if they hear that explanation, they may understand that one of the moments they once considered evidence against you was actually evidence of something entirely different. What if the moment that created distance between you was never what it appeared to be? Your soulmate is getting closer to that possibility. And the third party can feel the direction changing. That's why their next behavior becomes so revealing. Instead of remaining quiet, they may try to move first. A sudden conversation. An unexpected explanation. Perhaps even an attempt to reopen something everyone had already stopped discussing. But that creates a problem. Because when someone explains too much before being asked, people start wondering why. Your soulmate is already wondering. And they are watching more closely than anyone realizes. There is no need for chaos here. No need for dramatic confrontation. Truth does not always need a loud entrance. Sometimes it needs patience. Your soulmate is learning that. They are realizing that if something is genuine, it can survive questions. It can survive investigation. It can survive time. And whatever is real between you does not need confusion to protect it. That realization is giving your soulmate a new kind of confidence. They are no longer afraid of what they might discover. They want clarity even if clarity changes everything they previously believed. But before this part ends, there is one final shift you need to understand. Your soulmate has made a private decision. If the next conversation confirms what they are beginning to suspect, they will stop discussing you through other people. Completely. No more interpretations. No more second-hand explanations. No more allowing someone else to define what you meant. They will want the truth from the closest possible source. You. And that possibility is exactly what the third party never prepared for. Because once two people begin communicating from clarity instead of assumption, outside narratives become much harder to maintain. The distance begins losing its purpose. Questions become conversations. And conversations can change futures. Your soulmate is standing near that threshold now. One final piece remains. One person. One conversation. One answer. And when your soulmate finally hears what that person remembers about you, they are going to discover that the third party's biggest concern was never simply what your soulmate might find out. It was who your soulmate might become once they found it out. More independent. More certain. More willing to trust their own perception. And perhaps more willing to move toward you. But there is a twist your soulmate still cannot see. The person they are about to approach already knows why they are coming. And instead of waiting to be questioned, they may be preparing to reveal everything first. A door your soulmate thought had been closed for good has quietly opened again, and this time, nobody else gets to decide what they see on the other side. The person they were considering approaching did something unexpected. They reached out first. Not with a dramatic announcement. Not with accusations. Just a simple message that arrived at exactly the moment your soulmate had begun wondering whether they should make contact. And the timing stopped them. Because the message contained one sentence. There's something about that situation you never knew. Your soulmate stared at those words longer than they expected. Suddenly, the questions from the previous days came rushing back. The contradiction. The strange timeline. The third party's hesitation. The private act of kindness connected to you. And now this. Stay a little longer, because what followed was not the revelation your soulmate expected. They assumed this person would expose some dramatic secret. Instead, the person asked a question. Do you remember why they became distant? Your soulmate did. At least, they thought they did. They had carried an explanation for that moment for a long time. They believed you had simply changed. That perhaps your feelings had become uncertain. That maybe you had decided the connection was no longer important. And somewhere along the way, that interpretation became accepted as fact. But the person on the other side of the conversation said something that made your soulmate reconsider everything. That wasn't why. 4 words. Nothing more. Yet suddenly the entire emotional architecture of the past began moving. Your soulmate asked what they meant. There was a pause. Then the truth began arriving not as one enormous revelation, but as details. Small details. Precise details. The kind that are difficult to manufacture because they fit too naturally with moments your soulmate already remembers. They learned that during the period when you appeared distant, you had been dealing with a decision nobody fully understood. You had been trying to avoid making a complicated situation heavier. You could have spoken impulsively. You could have demanded answers. You could have made everything about your feelings. But instead, you stepped back. Not because you felt nothing. Because you were trying to understand what was right before acting. And suddenly your soulmate remembered your behavior differently. The silence. The hesitation. The unfinished sentences. The moments when you seemed ready to say something and then stopped. They had interpreted those moments as withdrawal. Now they wondered whether they had actually been restraint. That distinction hit deeply. Because restraint requires awareness. It means someone is thinking beyond the immediate moment. And your soulmate began asking the question they had avoided for too long. What if I misunderstood their silence? Don't skip this turning point. Because the person speaking to your soulmate hadn't finished. They explained that someone else knew what you were going through at the time. Someone had enough information to understand why you were behaving differently. Your soulmate immediately thought of the third party. But they didn't say the name. They waited. And then the person confirmed something that made the earlier timeline finally make sense. The third party had heard part of the story. Not all of it. Part of it. And somewhere between hearing a fragment and repeating it later, interpretation had filled the missing spaces. That changed everything. Because your soulmate suddenly understood something important. The story surrounding you may not have begun as a deliberate falsehood. It may have begun as incomplete information. But incomplete information repeated with confidence can eventually become something people treat like truth. Your soulmate sat with that realization. There was no need for anger. No need for blame. The larger lesson was already becoming clear. They had allowed conclusions to form before speaking directly with the person those conclusions were about. You. And now they had a choice. Defend the old interpretation because it was familiar. Or allow new information to change their perspective. Your soulmate chose the second. That is where the third party's real concern begins. Because someone who is willing to change their mind when better information appears becomes very difficult to influence through old assumptions. Your soulmate was becoming that person. Calmer. Sharper. More independent. And unexpectedly, more curious about you than before. Something huge is waiting inside that curiosity. Your soulmate asked another question. Did they ever say anything about me during that time? The answer didn't come immediately. The person hesitated. Not because there was something terrible to reveal. Because they wanted to remember the words accurately. Then they described a conversation. You had been asked why you didn't simply walk away. Why you didn't forget everything and move forward without looking back. According to this person, your response was surprisingly simple. You didn't speak bitterly. You didn't blame your soulmate. You didn't try to make yourself appear perfect. You simply acknowledged that sometimes people need time to understand what they cannot yet see. Your soulmate went silent. Because suddenly, your past behavior carried a completely different emotional weight. You had not been waiting helplessly. You had been continuing your own journey while leaving room for truth to emerge naturally. And perhaps that is exactly what was happening now. The truth was emerging. Slowly. Piece by piece. Without anyone forcing it. Your soulmate ended the conversation differently than they began it. They entered looking for evidence. They left with perspective. But then something happened almost immediately afterward. The third party contacted them. The timing was almost impossible to ignore. A casual message. An ordinary opening. But then came a question. Have you been talking to anyone about the past? Your soulmate froze. Not from fear. From recognition. How did the third party know they had started asking questions? Had someone mentioned it? Was it coincidence? Or had the change in your soulmate's behavior become that noticeable? They didn't answer immediately. And that delay changed the energy. Because now your soulmate could see the situation from outside it. The third party seemed unusually interested in what they knew. And your soulmate finally understood the advantage of not revealing everything. So they responded simply. I've just been thinking. Nothing more. The third party replied quickly. Too quickly. They began explaining things your soulmate had not asked them to explain. Old events. Old assumptions. Old reasons. And with every additional explanation, your soulmate became more certain of one thing. There was still another piece missing. Wait till the final moment, because the next discovery came from the third party themselves. During that conversation, they referenced something about you that your soulmate had never told them. Something specific. Something connected to a private moment between you and your soulmate. For a second, your soulmate wondered whether they remembered sharing it. They searched their memory. Nothing. That detail had never been part of the conversations they could recall. So how did the third party know? This question was different from all the others. Because now it wasn't about opinions. It wasn't about interpretations. It was about information. Your soulmate asked. Where did you hear that? The response took longer this time. Then came an explanation. But something about it didn't fit. A name was mentioned. Your soulmate knew that name. And they knew the person supposedly responsible for sharing the information had not been present when that private moment happened. Now the puzzle had another layer. But your soulmate didn't challenge the explanation. They had learned something valuable. When people believe their answer has been accepted, they often stop guarding the details. So your soulmate moved the conversation forward. They remained calm. And then, almost casually, they asked another question. When did they tell you? A date range was given. Your soulmate remembered that period clearly. And there it was again. Another timeline problem. The information had supposedly been shared before the person named could reasonably have known it. Your soulmate finally understood why the entire situation had felt strange. Different versions of the story had been built at different times. Details had moved. Interpretations had hardened. And somewhere underneath all of it was the original reality waiting to be separated from everything added later. Your soulmate wasn't panicking. They were becoming focused. And that focus is what the third party could feel. Because suddenly the usual explanations weren't working. Your soulmate was no longer responding emotionally to every statement. They were comparing. Remembering. Thinking. That is the transformation nobody expected. The discovery about you was changing how your soulmate processed everything. Not only your connection. Everything. They were learning to distinguish between what they knew, what they assumed, and what someone else had told them. Those three categories had once been blended together. Now they were separating. And your story looked completely different once they did. Before you go, hear this line. Your soulmate's biggest discovery may not be that somebody misunderstood you. It may be realizing that they themselves never gave you the opportunity to explain certain moments directly. That realization carries responsibility. And responsibility can become a turning point. Because instead of asking, why didn't they explain? Your soulmate is beginning to ask. Did I ever create a space where they could? That question changed their next decision. They are no longer interested in collecting endless opinions. They have heard enough. They have compared enough. They have followed enough fragments. Now they want something real. A conversation without intermediaries. A moment where nobody else translates your intentions. Nobody else decides what either of you means. Just clarity. And the thought of that conversation is exactly why the third party's behavior has become increasingly uncertain. Because if you and your soulmate speak directly, every old interpretation becomes testable. Some may prove accurate. Others may disappear instantly. But either way, the truth will finally belong to the people actually involved. Your soulmate is preparing for that possibility. They have even imagined what they would ask first. Not an accusation. Not, why did you do this? Something far more meaningful. They want to ask. What was happening that I didn't understand? That question could open everything. Because it doesn't demand defense. It invites context. And context is exactly what has been missing. But there is one final twist. Your soulmate thought they would be the one deciding when this conversation happens. They may be wrong. Because while they have been uncovering the past, something in the present has begun moving too. A message connected to you. A coincidence that feels strangely well-timed. A possible opening neither of you planned. And your soulmate has already noticed it. They haven't acted yet. But they are closer than they have been in a long time. The third party senses this. That's why their next move may be their most revealing one yet. They could try to redirect your soulmate one final time. But if they do, they face a problem they never had before. Your soulmate knows what to listen for now. Contradictions. Missing context. Unexplained certainty. And timing. The old pattern cannot remain invisible once someone has recognized it. So whatever happens next, one thing has changed permanently. Your soulmate is thinking for themselves. They are seeing you with fresh eyes. They are questioning the distance rather than simply accepting it. And somewhere inside them, a possibility they once pushed aside is becoming impossible to ignore. Maybe the story between you was never finished. Maybe it was interrupted by misunderstanding. Maybe what appeared to be an ending was only a chapter where neither person had enough information to understand the other. And now? The missing information is returning. One piece at a time. Your soulmate has almost reached the center of it. But they are about to discover something even they never considered. The third party's next move is not going to reveal more about you. It is going to reveal something about themselves. And when your soulmate recognizes why they have been so determined to stay involved in this story, they will finally understand what has been driving the entire situation from the beginning.